I'm Jen, founder of Rogue Habits. Those of you that don't know
Oh,
me,
we're on.
we're on.
Hey.
We began this discussion, I think, back in April when we were in more of a place of kind of questioning what we should do during this time. And now it's becoming more of a response to exploring our new normal in terms of the pandemic and how to also not go back to aspects of what this sort of accepted norm has been, especially in terms of social justice and violence. So, I wanted to kick this off with a brief outline for tonight. It's definitely not a traditional panel. We wanted to have like an open, casual hangout over drinks, wine from Sophie James, and just talk about the importance
Here's my wine.
of art. So we'll start with Angela's opening ceremony. We'll do quick intros, and then we'll start talking. And the Q&A box is open for anyone that wants to pop in a question, and the group will respond intermittently. They may not be all addressed, but we will keep an eye on it. So take it away, Angela.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Jen. I'm so happy to see all these faces. Yeah, so we wanted to start with just taking a minute to kind of acknowledge the relationship between the living and the dead. And so to think about, who we all are as individual people showing up in this particular space, in this virtual Zoom land, and to also to recognize and to acknowledge all those folks that are, kind of right here in the air around us. All those folks that, had a part in terms of how and why we are here right now today, sitting here together. So I want to just invite everyone to just kind of turn your gaze inward, if it feels comfortable, to close your eyes for a minute, turn away from the camera eye, and just take a few breaths. And, see if there's a sound that comes with those breaths as you're exhaling, right? And going inward, just noticing the breath without judgment, noticing what the body does on its own. We think we're in control. Just taking a breath. Each breath is an opportunity to arrive again and again. So we're gathering here in this virtual Zoom land. We also want to acknowledge the physical land that we are each situated on in our various places around the Bay Area, around our state, around the US, wherever you are joining from. See if you can just kind of tune in, tap into the physical geography upon which you are sitting, standing, being. We want to acknowledge here, especially in the Bay Area, the physical land that we're gathering on that has witnessed massacre, death marches, destruction, devastation. This land upon which we gather, where we survive, this geography that we call home, where we have made our families, our communities, our lives. Wherever you are joining from, take just a few breaths to recognize those who were here before you, those who were here long before we ever arrived, those who were lost and stolen along the way. We want to acknowledge those who are no longer physically present. And in just a minute, I'm going to invite you to speak the names of your ancestors, the names of your dead. Calling in the dead is not something that I do lightly or casually in any way. In some cultures, the names of the dead are not even spoken of by name, like the power and the significance of the name is so relevant and urgent that we might identify those people by relationship. So auntie, mama, papa, whatever that however you want to identify that relationship. So naming rituals, of course, are cross-cultural. These are gestures of resistance, right? This is about survival and belonging from the post-mortem body to the morning body. We speak the names of our dead as repair and restoration. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to go ahead and open up your microphones. And when I say start, we will just call in those folks who are no longer here with us that we want to invite into this conversation and to acknowledge the responsibility that we have as living, breathing, alive people while we are accompanied by our dead. We are accompanied by our dying people, and in this moment of global pandemic, right? These numbers, these abstractions of people, these numbers are growing and increasing daily. So let's all just take another breath together. And go ahead and open up your microphones. We can start with names and they'll just kind of all roll in. There'll be a sort of overlapping chorus. Shows up. Feels that feeling in the heart space.
Betty Reeves.
Count.
Judith Salcetta.
Eddie and
Yeah, Hootie.
Miriam Bloomberg.
Welcome.
Mom and Dad.
Richard Smith.
Dad.
Welcome.
Babies.
James Thomas Chambers. Marilyn Martin Farrar.
Breonna Taylor.
Breonna Taylor. Dr. Maya Angelou.
Jessica Williams.
Welcome.
Oscar Grant.
Welcome. Welcome. Marilyn Martin Farrar.
Yeah, Hootie.
My auntie Dee Dee Clark Smith.
Heaven.
Welcome. My unborn children. Audre Lorde.
Grandpa.
Welcome. I want to be sure it's clear, those of you participants joining us, please go ahead and open your microphones and speak the names of your people into our space. Everyone is welcome. Prince. Sadie, Rue, Kira Boyd,
Whitney Houston.
Dorothy Dandridge.
Greg.
Welcome.
John Lennon.
Welcome.
Little Richard.
Tupac.
Biggie Smalls.
Welcome. Hey.
Huey Newton.
Welcome.
Elijah McClain.
Welcome.
George Floyd.
Welcome. Good. So just taking a breath, noticing feelings, emotions in the body. We speak the names as protestations against systemic violation, Black, Brown, BIPOC, Indigenous, our European ancestors, all of our ancestors from all around the globe. We speak the names of those remembered, lost, found, forgotten, known, unknown, never known at all. Names redacted, erased, disappeared. Our bodies be the witness. We give voice to those names, to those lives, making sound, making breath from our own bodies. We speak the names. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining. Welcome. Welcome all of our people. Just want to recognize, how we don't actually show up as individual people walking in the world doing our work, but we show up with a whole crew, right? So I don't know, we've been, part of this conversation that we started however many months ago was kind of thinking about resources, right? Like how we're sustaining ourselves. One of the questions that keeps coming up, I find, I notice in emails and meetings is like, how are you holding up? And so part of that, like holding up is about being vertical, right? So being upright, we think about life and living as being mapped on the vertical versus the horizontal, right? Which is the terrain of, the underground. It's the space of the dead, right? People in repose, rest. So, yeah, just thinking about, how we're surviving right now in these moments. Survival's like, we all need survival strategies. So that may be, something that we can share this evening and think about, what kind of resource and structure of support we can be for each other. One of the aspects of this conversation really started with thinking about the relationship between artists, artists, galleries, museums, arts institutions, public space, right? All these places where art shows up, where we put our art, and thinking about, how these relationships, these power dynamics are really shifting right now. That's one thing I think we're observing and recognizing as, many of us are holding our arts institutions accountable right now in very specific ways. So go ahead, get your chocolate, girl. So, just thinking about how we do that and, what's working, what's not working also, because that's a big part of it. So, yeah. Hi. Should we have another toast?
Yes.
Another cheers. We got wine here from Sophie James.
Thank you for that intro, Angela. That was really wonderful.
Cheers. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Carrie.
Meryl, you're on mute, but you look great.
Already fucking up again. What I was hopefully everybody else that's joining us has an opportunity to have a beverage or a snack, whatever you prefer. And thanks.
Or a puff.
Yeah. What should we talk about first?
Do we want to do a quick intro for everyone?
All right.
Me, I'm T. I'm from Oakland, California.
West Oakland.
The bottom specifically, like Angela just pointed out. I just love saying that I'm from Oakland, born and raised. And, I come from two parents who were activists. They were both Black Panthers. And I just feel really lucky to have my history and know it. I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Jen, for inviting me. And I'm here to talk the good, the bad, the ugly. I'm here to talk shit. Let's get into it. It's a lot of things going on in the world. A lot of things, most things fucked up. So here we are. Let's talk about it after we get all introduced. I'm excited. I'm also really happy to be in the company of everyone here, including the guests who signed up. Thank you for doing so.
Yeah.
I feel so lucky to be around such intelligent, informed folks, and this is very special.
Oh,
So thank you.
hi, Kelsey. Hi, Julian. One of my all-time favorite students is here. Um, so I'm Angela Hennessy, she, her pronouns. I am an artist. I'm a professor at California College of the Arts. I am a bit of an activist these days. Yeah, so I'm a teacher. I'm a student. I'm a griever. Big part of my work is about making space for death and grief, which, you know, I think we're all sort of in the mix of that right now in various degrees and various ways. I don't know. I'm an artist. I make stuff. I work with hair. I work with a lot of different materials. I'm also the co-founder of See Black Women with my other co-founder here, and Dana King is out there somewhere too, and Jamani Montague. Yeah, so I think that's good. I don't know. I can't think of anything else.
Mm-hmm.
All right, how about I pass? I'm gonna pass it to Arundina.
Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. I'm also super honored to be here. Really excited to join in this conversation. My name is Arundina Delgadillo. I'm an associate curator of history at the Oakland Museum of California, recently rebranded OMCA. I'm from LA, and I started my museum career at a brown place down there called La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, which is not grammatically correct in English or in Spanish, so it's like perfectly Mexican American. And I've been at the Oakland Museum for about 3 years. So we're going through a lot of shifts, like a lot of other institutions. We're at an interesting like mid-level scale, and for better or worse, we're looked to in the field as an org that's closer to the vanguard of being a place to explore social justice and to sort of push at the envelope of the sort of structure of museums internally, and then how we share, how and what we share with our publics. So I'm very excited to hear how you all experience institutions, to sort of nerd out about museums and galleries. I'm not an artist, but I'm really honored to be here and share some thought with y'all. So thanks. And I'll popcorn to Meryl.
There you go. So good to meet you. Thank you. I am Meryl. I'm an artist in the Bay Area. I've been in the Bay Area for about 16 years. In Oakland for 4 now. Happy to be here. I love discourse. I love dialogue. I love learning things. And really, I feel like I have some of my own questions and things I'd love to talk about. For the most part, I'm here to really like learn. And I'm super appreciative of everybody coming and being involved. So, I also am an educator. I used to, in the good old days, I guess, teach middle school art electives. So I'm not essential to their education right now, since it's an elective, art thing. But I miss the kids a lot. And so I'm really passionate about educating youth. And I also teach neon workshops out of my studio in San Francisco. So I teach adults as well. And my partner, Kelsey, and I run a collective of female identifying neon bender artists from around the world called She Bends. And we also do a lot of educational programming through that as well, and aim to bring the conversation around our industry towards sustainability and diversity. And T is actually, I'm mentoring her right now in neon. And one of the reasons why her room looks like a pink glow is because she just managed to light up a neon in there today. So it looks awesome. But yeah, that's a bit about me, and I will popcorn popcorn now to Carrie.
Awesome. Thanks, Meryl. So I'm Carrie Montgomery. She, her, hers are my pronouns. Really just echoing kind of gratitude and thanks for this platform and this space. I think it's so important, especially now that we're all kind of hunkered down at home and not able to collaborate and see each other in person, that we just continue conversation and conversations that are difficult and uncomfortable. It's so important, especially in the work that I do at the DeYoung and the Legion of Honor, where I'm the director of special events. So I oversee all of the internal fundraising, membership, and donor events. So we host about 100 events annually. I've got a really incredible team of all women, and we just really support each other and try and push each other to really figure out, you know, what a museum in the 21st century and in today's climate should be and what that looks like. And a little bit of my background, I'm actually born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. So I am a Southerner at heart, but half of my family is in Berkeley. So I kind of grew up visiting San Francisco and the East Bay through summers, driving cross country and then flying back with my mom and my dad kind of flipping up on both trips. So I've spent about a decade in museum work, worked at the Birmingham Museum of Art in Alabama, and then the Los Angeles County Museum of Art in LA, and have been at the Fine Arts Museums for just about 2 years. So just really excited and grateful to be a part of this conversation. And I will pass it to Dimitri.
Thanks. I'm also really excited to be here with everyone. The second that I got invited, I was like, I must be part of this, especially just because of who else is on here. So my name is Dimitri Broxton, he, him pronouns. I am the Senior Director of Education at MOAD, Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. And so as an education department, the mission is really to be the hub of education about and for the arts of Africa and the African diaspora. Like we're trying to be that one place, but our audiences are mainly here in the Bay Area, and we serve all 9 counties through our programming, or we did before the pandemic, but now the really nice part is that we're now expanding beyond just the Bay Area, but even to an international audience. And that's really been the power of the positivity that has come out of the pandemic. It pushed us into directions we wouldn't have otherwise. I've been at MOAD now for 4 years in this cycle, but I also worked at MOAD for 3 years towards the beginning of the project from 2007 to 2010. Left in the interim after I got my master's in museum studies. Like a month after I graduated, I left the museum world and went to go work on education policy in my hometown of Oakland, born and raised. I'm one of those rare people, and I still live in Oakland and have been here for 4 decades now. Outside of my work in museums, I'm also an artist. So I work with Patricia Sweeto Gallery in San Francisco, and I primarily work with beads, which is an interesting, material as a male identified person in the West to work with. It's not rare outside of the West though. And I love to nerd out about museums, galleries, the art world. And it's nice to not just be with other museum people within this conversation. So I'm looking forward to it.
All right, y'all, where do we kick this off? No.
Get us started. I don't know. Jen said you had some prompts that you want to just jump into.
Come on, Meryl. You know you want to. Take us there.
We can hit them too.
I mean, we already have some of the more established prompts that we had discussed in our sort of initial call. There are some things that are on the top of my mind just because I've been going through them, and another friend of mine has gone through them recently. I'm not sure how much of a digression it is from the conversation of art in the real world, and it's really about social media.
And
And
Get it, Meryl.
well, I guess social media is sort of a place where a lot of these things are happening. You know, a lot of conversations are taking place about a variety of things, and we're all showing up on that platform in particular. It seems a little bit more, I don't know. I guess my question is, what's the role of social media in all of this? What is the protocol on the world of social media when we see harm being done to our community? And I don't know if anybody saw the film The Social Dilemma, but that's kind of also on my top of my brain about it as well. As artists and creatives, we sort of feel obligated to be in that space, right? It's especially as a freelancer myself, I, you know, and some of my other friends, it's where we kind of get clients, it's where we make our money, it's where we promote our work. And there's a pressure on some people to show up, to perform. And I'm just curious how important that is in the grand scheme of things, in the grand scheme of the conversation. And then when we do see people who are trying to do good on you know, their platform and for their audience and in the world, you know, make a misstep or something. What is the protocol for calling out harm on that platform when we see it? I don't know if I'm articulating it very well, or if it has anything to do with this conversation tonight, but it was something that it was on the top of my brain. And I think I asked like 5 different questions in there. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts.
I freaking love this topic because you know, I just noticed myself perusing through social media at the beginning of the pandemic. So it's particularly when Black Lives Matter, I think, kind of became this underground kind of, maybe not underground is the right word, less mainstream topic of conversation, and just, you know, kind of noticing artists that rode that wave right away. And I'm just gonna talk about artists. I personally don't call people out, but I definitely would talk to different friends where, you know, a certain artist would just suddenly have this Black Lives Matter thing and they get all political, but then you scroll through the rest of their timeline and it's like, you've never done this. Like, you know, are you riding the wave of this right now to try to get more likes or more followers? Or is this something where you're genuinely taking a shift? And so I would just say for me and from some of my closest friends, it's really about, you know, giving people space for that. But then, you know, you could tell when it's disingenuous and when someone is just trying to get more followers, if they're trying to sell their broken glass necklaces. Let throw a little shade on that. You know, but you know, I think it just really depends. I think someone who's always been socially engaged or has a history of it, or if they continue that beyond this period, which is yet to be seen. I don't know what other folks think about it.
Yeah, it's valid.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Arundina.
Okay. I'm not on social media. I'm an aberrant millennial in that way. So I can't really speak to, but I remember MySpace. I think more, what I've been following is how institutions have been sort of called out for similar kind of what you're talking about, Dimitri, this like performative, like one layer of recognition of what's happening with no like follow up about how they're going to actually make changes internally or how they're going to restaff, you know, what it's a very sort of paying lip service to something that feels popular rather than doing the deep and hard work to look internally and make longer term shifts. And I have to say, I both in a sort of like voyeuristic sense and on a professional level have really appreciated that there is that platform to call out larger institutions. But to me, what's built into that dynamic is like an inherent power imbalance. So it doesn't feel as challenging, I think, when an individual or even like a smaller organization calls out, you know, problematic things that are either specific or, again, calling out some of the performative activism that we've seen from organizations like the SF MoMA stuff. This most recent, what was it, the Met that was buying
The Whitney.
The Whitney, thank you, that's the one, the Whitney. It's been, when folks, what other avenues do people really have to create like a larger conversation about what's happening either internally or how folks are experiencing institutions on the outside? I feel like it's a really powerful way to sort of push at these larger kind of, beast has too negative a connotation, but like creatures, right? And the space that we take up. But I do think that function sort of devolves and doesn't work quite as well when it's person to person.
Yep.
Yeah. That's
100%. I think what ends up happening is there's a certain empowerment of the people. It's power to the people. Like people can go to their page and, really call them out. And there is a lot of pressure, when we have hundreds of thousands of people going to an institution page, telling them that they've done wrong and been harmful. That's incredibly powerful. Like you said, when it devolves into person-to-person conflicts, it's harmful. And what I've, just without divulging too much, what I've experienced both personally and like peripherally is that we're all in our own communities there, right? We all have our own like set of followers. And when we talk about justice, and we talk about harm within communities and doing better and all of those things, when we're not calling out the harm that's coming to the small guys page, or people who, like they say, everybody's a critic. And I think a lot of people, especially white women creatives, are feeling a pressure to really think through appearances. When we're trying, ultimately Instagram is a platform for us to, like I said, get clients and promote our work. And so it becomes a little, I don't know, it just becomes a little bit difficult to know what the right thing to do is, just based on how this one person over here is going to see it versus how this one person over here is going to see it. And then when the harm comes to our page, when we might be doing really good work outside of social media and nobody would ever know. So when the harm comes to our page, what's the protocol? Like what should be expected of our own community? To call out harm when they see it happening, right? It's just a little bit
I think it's up to our community to have deeper interpersonal relationships and practice of communication and of ways of addressing harm and supporting one another and that person to person, because social media is not always going to be there. I don't know, the last couple of weeks been feeling like the end of the world, or like, I just don't know. What if it all bursts? You know what I mean? So I think that's a good point that you raise and bring up, Meryl, about how it informs our community and what are the ways in which community are able to not so much support like a calling out in the call out culture, but very much so putting in sustainable, solid practices that we can actually address the harm that takes place. It's very important to me. And I just wrote down another thing, like it's not so good person to person, like you were saying. How do you pronounce your name? Erendina. It's not, the thing with social media though too, is that there's censorship. Someone might get called out and, feel so embarrassed and harmed. They'll delete their page or block someone so that they don't have to withstand being, confronted with the harm that they created or started. So it's very important to have these other practices that we can put in place within community and physical spaces, which I know is hard right now because COVID, right? But one day this too will end,
Yeah, and, I think part of it is that we're sort of, we've inherited this Western European practice around discipline and punishment, right? So what it means to actually hold institutions or to hold
people,
individuals, whether they're your intimate relationships, your intimate partners, out family members, et cetera, beyond. I think that we're in this process of actually trying to understand what does it mean to hold people accountable, but still like hold them, dare I say, with love, right? Yeah. And like the Xing out of people in community, what does that do? But that's about punishment, right? And that's why we have, police. That's why we have policing. That's why we have prisons, exactly. And so, when we think about what happens when someone experiences harm, the practices, and I'm saying this kind of, as a generalization.
Ostracize.
In terms of, the strategy is about ostracizing that person and Xing them out. But yet, what is that? Where does that go? What does that leave us? Like, what about, sort of practices where we actually bring people in for conversation and for, I think accountability, I don't know, I've been, kind of digging into this a lot in terms of, just my personal relationships and thinking about, if there are people in my life that I'm committed to, and there are institutions, I work for a big, like one of the biggest art colleges on the West Coast, right? And we are undergoing our own reckoning in terms of, harm that has been created between students and faculty and all of that. And so if I'm committed to a person or to a community or to an institution, then I want to bring them in with love, right? And it doesn't mean that we just forget shit that happened or just kind of blindly forgive, but actually, how do we do that work to reestablish trust, to reestablish partnership, to understand how, my survival is interdependent with your survival, with, all of you, everyone here in this conversation, right? So I think that's just something that, we've inherited this way of relating to harm and to trauma that it seems to result in, it kind of sidesteps actually the process of grief or the experience of trauma to get to, some kind of relationship to punishment. And that, I don't know, I think it's like, that's what we're reckoning with right now, right? And so, how we do that or how we hold conversation for what that might look like, and like the folks, and, we couldn't be in a better place right now to be thinking about transformative justice or restorative justice and, even like understanding the distinctions between the two, and that it's real work. And one of the things I have been noticing in terms of relationships between artists and institutions is that there's a way that I think a lot of folks are showing up feeling like, how do we quick fix this situation? How do we like create some immediate, kind of blanket thing that's going to kind of sideline actually the harm? How do we put up a new monument, right away where the one that was empty was like just, taken down whatever the week before, right? So this sort of quick fix thing that just like, it doesn't actually do the work. And we were talking in one of our last conversations about what does it mean to, to sort of gaze into that empty space and to be present with that loss. If a monument comes down, right, like what is that empty space? What is that space that is created by the removal of a particular monument? And so, how we relate to that emptiness, I think just has like really big ramifications and opportunities to reflect on who we are. And, the rush to fill a space or to put up the new monument right away as if nothing happened. And, like we missed the opportunity to actually understand what it means to be a human being,
I love that. I love that so much. And I think it's a really important message to a lot of artists out there that do feel a lot of pressure to create. There's a lot of questions going around in the creative community. Have you been making art? Are you making art? And for the most part, I think a lot of people are just feeling that empty space. And I think maybe not feeling good about it, but they should feel better about it. And I myself am not the most patient person in the world. So it's definitely something that I should meditate on more. And I will bow out now and just say thank you for indulging that conversation and for all of your guys' input.
I have one quick thought just on social media, and I think I kind of have like a parallel thought and question, because speaking from a purely personal standpoint on social media, you know, I have friends and family who are extremely religious and conservative and grew up in Alabama and have social medias that have just been blatantly ignoring any and all conversations that have been going on. And so I really like, Angela, your kind of reflection towards accountability. I think in my personal life, I've really found myself using social media as a tool to reach back out to people, to hold space for conversations, to reconnect. And it's not just to say like, hey, why did you not post a black square and like show an image of, you know, like there is a performative aspect to it, but there's also an area where it's like, why can't you engage with these conversations? Like, what makes you so uncomfortable that you are so frightened that you're going to say the wrong thing, that you don't say anything at all? And I think that's a really big problem. And it's been interesting, you know, a lot of the responses that I get from, you know, friends that I went to college with and my aunts and uncles that are kind of like, oh, well, I don't want to be performative and just do X, Y, Z. And then the conversation ends there. And it's like, no, you can't use that as an excuse. You really actually have to, whether it's on Instagram or with your friend or at your church or at your work, like figure out what your sphere of influence is and just start engaging, like just start having these conversations. And from an institutional perspective, you know, I do think there's a sense of urgency around everything. Like we have to do a post and we need to share our 10-step plan and we need to figure out what we're doing. But there's also a huge need to really take a step back and have a more thoughtful and inclusive approach and recognize, you know, one, that we need objectivity and reflect on kind of the people who are holding those conversations so that it's not just an echo chamber of kind of the same internal ideas that don't really go anywhere. And I think just experiencing some of the work at the De Young and the Legion that the staff has been doing and working with Sangeeta of Be the Change is like internally, the museums are predominantly a white staff organization, and there just wasn't even a base language of understanding to talk about racism. And like that was like step one of what we needed. It was just like understanding power structures and understanding accountability structures and understanding, you know, just reflecting the mirror on us before we can use our platform to reflect it back on the community. And so that's, I think, just been an interesting like step that I've taken on social media between the institutional perspective and the individual perspective, just like trying to hold my friends accountable and my family accountable, but then also using it as a way to engage. And it's nice that like you can send, you know, directors of museums a direct Instagram on their feed and like people can tag it and like it and comment it, and like that becomes a whole discussion internally, and that's awesome. Like I really appreciate that aspect of it. But I think, Angela, to your point, it's like, where do we go from there? Like how do we continue this conversation, and how do we keep doing this work, and how do we engage further, and how can institutions be a platform to engage and be open to criticism and be open for feedback and not just have to have the answer on everything? Because quite honestly, we don't, and we won't anytime in the near future. Like this is constant work. And we're all learning and we're all making mistakes, and we'll continue to do that. So
that last point really resonates. Sorry, Meryl. I was raised in a very progressive, like brown Chicano space in East LA. And so did that whole like, you know, reckoning with like, oh, my norms are not the norms that most people live within. So I feel like I'm like lots of people, I'm like constantly coming up against, which I find delicious, and it's really helpful, I think, for my work, which would be like synthesizing lots of different perspectives or trying to craft a narrative where there are lots of different entry points. But one of the things that really struck me recently was around, you know, it's sort of a long story, but the museum, like so many others, you know, had a sort of internal reckoning right around the murder of George Floyd. And there was a lot of stuff that came up internally, primarily from like our Black colleagues, about the disconnect between what we say and what their experience has been at the museum. The fact that there isn't a single Black staff member, not even just in the curatorial department, but in the entire department that creates exhibitions. No one in prep, no one in project management. Just like that whole section is devoid. But we tell so many Black stories. Just, we're really, like so many other folks, again, reckoning. And one of the suggestions, so we broke up into lots of teams and like tried to organize ourselves in a horizontal way rather than hierarchical. It was interesting, still ongoing. But one of the things that we, each of those teams was really insistent on and felt was really central to our work was that we should create some kind of public-facing campaign so that we're held accountable for all these promises that we're going to try to achieve. So that we're not just like patting ourselves internally on the back and saying, oh, we got this done and this and this, but really checking that against how folks are experiencing us. And there was a staff member, a relatively senior person, who really genuinely heard that suggestion and was like, well, but if we advertise, that we still have room to grow and that there's still places for us to like figure out that our space doesn't quite yet feel safe for Black staff, but most like POC staff, if we turn ourselves inside out and show all of our imperfections, won't that like limit or put at risk our recruitment efforts for people of color? Like, wouldn't that mean that they don't want to come here because we're saying like we're fucked up in all of these different ways, so why would you want to join our institution? And to me, that was like a totally different way of, I would have never imagined that people would have that response. To me, it's like, oh, I would want to go there because you all are committing to the work, doing it in a way that feels like uncomfortable and vulnerable and working through that discomfort because you know that the goal at the other end, or meaning that this work never ends, but that goal that you're striving for is so valuable that it's worth being a tiny bit uncomfortable and being really transparent about the fact that we don't have the answers, that no one really does, and that we're all in process. That feels like a super beautiful thing for institutions that have, all institutions, but especially those that have resources to start modeling. Getting away a little bit, Angela, from this like Western way of thinking and sort of operating that, that's what that brought to me.
Yeah, Ed and Dina, I'm glad you brought that, because for me, it's also, we talked about this in the last conversation, but I think that at least at my museum, we definitely look at OMCA and the work that y'all are doing over there to try to come to that reckoning. And I kind of talked about it. I was like, I work at a Black institution where the staff is predominantly Black. Our board is pretty substantially Black as well, but we still have so many issues that, and not to say that my institution is bad or anything in case my boss is out there, but we all have work to do. And I think this moment has really taught everyone, like, you cannot be comfortable. Just because we put Black art on the wall doesn't mean that we have equity issues figured out, that everyone feels comfortable walking into our space. We are a museum, and museums, as Carrie and I were talking about last time, are founded on exclusions. Like, no matter what your museum is, just the foundation of how museums started, how collections got started, and we're not even a collecting institution, but we're still founded on exclusion and privilege and catering to those who have the most wealth. So there's still work to do. And I think, by admitting that that you have issues and you're still working on things, I think it increases public trust to not, and it also kind of tears down that ivory tower facade that most museums carry around. Like, we are the experts, and it can actually lead towards this model of actually bringing in the community and not just putting out the lip service that we are here to serve our local community and we do these little token programs here and there and look at how great we are, but actually to really open up the dialogue with community members and allow them, to kind of tear, or maybe not tear, but I guess tear down the structures that make people uncomfortable and not want to engage with an institution, and allow institutions to kind of build something where there is community trust. And like Angela was saying at the beginning, I think this moment that, kind of the silver lining behind us pausing our work, being on the virtual spaces, that we can all look at ourselves, and we can try to put some of that work in before we open. I know some of you guys are opening sooner than others, but at least in that process to be able to put in that time to kind of think. But yeah, institutions have lots of issues, no matter which one they are.
It seems like generally people are just looking to see what's under everybody's hood these days.
Wait, say that again, Meryl?
Right?
What'd you say?
Like
Meryl, would you repeat that?
everybody just wants. Oh, sorry. So I was just making a comment. It just seems like there's a call to see what's under everybody's hood, so to speak, right? And all in the same way that it's becoming difficult, like Carrie was mentioning, like a lot of what her family is, very religious, and she uses like personal viewpoint on social media to sort of educate them. It's becoming harder and harder, I think, to maintain relationships with people who have a different, who aren't able to have these conversations and meet you in a loving space the way that we're all sort of wanting to meet. And in that way, like we're sort of in kind of in an unprecedented way, we're sort of drawing a line in the sand with with everything, right? Whether it's our personal relationships or, it's a lot of examining under the hood, basically. That's what it is. And I also was really interested. What'd you say?
No, go ahead.
I was really interested. I was just going to move it on to, unless anybody had anything else to say, I was looking at some of Jenny's question here in our Q&A about curious how panelists feel about current local efforts to bring art to have work educate and resonate during this time, e.g. Painting the Void, which I'm not sure some of you guys have heard of that initiative, Painting the Void. 1, what are the current efforts during this time? And 2, what efforts do you want to see from the community? So I was just going to turn our attention over to the Q&A if anybody had any things to say, unless we were still talking about what we were just talking about.
About current local efforts.
I guess I could share one initiative that the DeYoung is doing kind of to support the local arts community that's been really exciting, is to showcase local artists, almost 800 local artists for a salon style hang in our main exhibition Herps galleries. This kind of bubbled up as an idea late last year and got shifted because that's what exhibition schedules do. They just shift. And we kind of landed on a really wonderful concept to support the local Bay Area community, which, having only been at the museums for 2 years, I know the relationship that a city museum has with the city. I think that's ebbed and flowed at the DeYoung and the Legion due to so many things, including just staff structures, changing board, changing directors, changing curators. So we're really excited. I will be on site all next week intaking artists for, I think it's over 1,300 works that will be hung in the galleries, and it'll be a free exhibition, salon style, floor to ceiling, and 100% of the proceeds goes back to artists. So we're facilitating that on our own platforms to be able to support artists during these times. And I think, I have a struggle internally of museums supporting local arts community and supporting kind of artists that go in the gallery community. And, I personally feel that museums have a huge responsibility to support the local community. And of all the museums I've worked at, they've only fallen short and will continue to fall short. And, there's not enough opportunity and just platforms to kind of engage even in conversations like this. But I'm really grateful that that's on the agenda, that will be opening, I think, the beginning of October and close the end of January. And just really excited to see the response from artists. There were just really brief prompts given out in terms of themes to kind of focus on. But just seeing a snippet of some of the works and hearing a press release and seeing some of the behind the scenes just feeling grateful that the museums have been able to kind of open the door for that, and really think that it should continue, and it shouldn't just be kind of a performative. We're in COVID. What can we do to create a really wonderful PR spiel and do a great exhibition, which serves multiple purposes? But, you know, this needs to be a lasting dialogue and a lasting platform, and something that we continue in a really meaningful way. So that was just a snippet that kind of came up from the Dion, which is great.
What are ways that maybe institutions can get involved with like local galleries to start the conversation off about supporting artists? For example, my husband happens to own a gallery in Oakland that supports a lot of local artists, emerging local artists, and you know, he is starting to engage in some of those conversations, because there are artists who have grabbed the attention of people, and they're starting a relationship to tap into that, and to try and support the emerging art community locally more. How are ways that you see those conversations, like what do those conversations look like? How are ways that institutions can partner a little bit more with galleries, local galleries that are successful in really supporting the local artists of the community?
Yeah, I want to tap in on that, because I think basically that our institutions need to actually trust the artists that that they're trying to connect with. And one thing that I have experienced is that, you know, like being invited to an exhibition, or, you know, receiving some kind of award, but then it's all sort of couched in this relationship where the institution seems to think that they know better what I should be doing or how I should be doing it, or, you know, what kind of, like, you know, postcard image or graphics should go for my exhibition. And so I think we need to really reverse those power dynamics. Like, I really kind of just want institutions to show up and be like, what do you need? And how can I support you? And what does that look like? Like, what is your dream? What is your vision? You know, you tell us what you want us to do. And I mean, you know, I think that that's actually possible. And it's, you know, it kind of comes out of this like romantic paternalism thing, where institutions that have been endowed with this kind of authority, or this legacy of being, you know, people who protect and conserve, you know, culturally shared significant, you know, objects, or, you know, art or paintings or whatever it might be, as if they are the protectors of, you know, this thing that we call art and the art world. But really, it's also in the service of curators and historians and the writers and all of these sort of folks that are in between the experience of the participant and the viewer and the experience of the maker. And like, I have lots of friends and people that I love that are in all of those jobs, and I totally get that. But it's also, you know, this, I think, a way that whatever's happening with the artist is sort of held as this kind of mysterious thing, but like, you know, or as if we don't know what we're doing. And the thing is that we do. And so I think just kind of restoring some sense of trust of like, hey, you know, y'all could just like actually sit down, take a pause, and listen to what it is that we're saying. And you know, there's a way that I think our bigger institutions that got like hella bank endowments, all kinds of funds, so much money and resource, that, you know, it becomes about this process of the private collectors and how you have an exhibition that is really about putting a collection on and increasing the value of that collection, as opposed to actually supporting the artists who are making the work. So we got to like shift those hierarchies.
Yeah, I think it's a question about who gets to become the gatekeeper in the art world, who decides that. And it's also about how these institutions, cultural institutions, museums, how they are designing and their programming, so that what you're talking about is inclusive, and that it's the ethos of those organizations, that it's not just in a time of crisis that Black Lives Matter, and that everyone wants to have something to say now about my Black life or about, you know, community activists, community artists, artists who are, you know, doing murals. You know, I grew up with 5 brothers, and grew up tagging streets, you know, tagging posters and, you know, making signs and that way and whatnot. So it would just be a really grand idea for these institutions to incorporate into their ethos just this as a regular practice, to have their programming be inclusive of the local communities. Why wouldn't it be in the first place? Most of the time you go to these institutions, they're in the hood anyway. And, you know, that's where, you know, I see the most fabulous art, honestly. And that's not just in Oakland, that is in, you know, that's in Germany, that's in London. Every hood I've been to all around the world, it's like the artists are there, and you have that direct resource, and you need to be tapping into, you know, these institutions, these institutions should be tapping into them, and they should also be providing resources and creating equity for the youth. I don't know how anyone else feels on this panel, but right now I'm feeling more than ever that the youth need to be engaged and activated, and cultural institutions, you know, have the resources to be able to tap in while we're in COVID, and give them, you know, resources to be able to use their hands, create art, and reflect on the time. They literally, as, you know, cliche as this is or may sound, they are our future. And I'm feeling really, you know, sad for our youth right now they don't have, it's being robbed from them, and they need spaces and places in these institutions to step up for them right now, so that they can express themselves and that they can help create a new world for us, and realize and be the ones to say, this can never fucking happen again. Like, but they're not going to do it if we don't provide them a space to be able to do that. And that's where, you know, I'm really focused on. You know, I have a 16-year-old nephew and 2 young nieces. So it's, I look at what they're going through, and I see, and I think, damn, what is life for y'all right now? And what role can, you know, Oakland Museum, the young Moab play in their lives right now? I think a big part.
Well, I feel like
we actually have a question in the comments from a teacher, so I just want to make sure that you guys all see that. Okay, go ahead.
I see that one, and I think because I work in education, T, what you're saying is so right on and so spot on. I think at least I can talk about my work, and then I am in a coalition with other educators at museums around the Bay Area. We are struggling. We have the resources, and we are struggling to get them out. I think at the beginning of the shelter in place, I pretty much every week was sitting on, and I guess I'll say it because you guys know who they are, or they know who they are, with Oakland Unified and San Francisco Unified School Districts, about how they were going to reach the students. And so a lot of the conversation was about community organizations providing academic support to students. And then several of us stepped up and were like, okay, what about the arts? Like, we've already had these conversations. Art is essential. And so how do we access the students? Because there's tons of resources. Like, all the museums have resources that are online. There's free downloadable curriculum for the person that asked. There's even programs like we do bi-weekly workshops, and actually there's a ton of museums across America that are doing those, and even in the Caribbean I've been able to find museums that are doing that. But school systems, and this is probably a diversion from the topic we're talking about, but the school systems and those who control them do not value the arts. And it's really a matter of our entire society as a whole does not think that art is an essential thing. So, I got 3 kids that are homeschooling right now at school, and it's reading all day, writing all day, mathematics all day. And so, we keep on, as educators, being like, okay, where is our entry point? Our students, they need physical activity, they need music, they need visual arts, because, science has proven, and studies have proven that enhances the other areas. But so far there is no answer. And so they're like, yeah, one day you'll be back to quote unquote normal, and then you can actually bring the students in. So I think I can talk on the behalf of museums, are now spending a lot of staff time figuring out how to create brand new resources, because most of us were not ready for this virtual environment. And even after we go from the virtual environment, we're not going to have like 100 people in our spaces at one time for a while. So we're trying to all pivot to figure out like, well, how do we reach the students? And so I think it's, again, when we talk about this, it's really setting up on the foundation of the values of us as a people, our entire community. Like, people are not valuing the arts.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone has anything to add on to that.
I will also say that as a craftsperson, just as an artist myself, answering this question as a craftsperson, I know that this is something that I'm extremely passionate about, is educating people on manual competency. If we're going to talk about building a better future, there needs to be actual builders, people who can actually build things. Right, T? So a lot of, unfortunately, I guess unfortunately or fortunately, it depends on which side of the coin you're looking at, a lot of craftspeople, woodworkers, neon artists like myself get their equipment from businesses that have closed down or schools that have stopped those programs, right? So woodshop is no longer a thing in most public schools, whereas before, our society really put an emphasis on that, or even gave an alternative form of education to people, right? Like, maybe maybe higher education isn't an option for you, or isn't something that you even want to do. Like, here's how to work with your hands. Here's how to make money working with your hands. So that's something that I'm really passionate about. And to answer her question more specifically about suggestions on how the young artists can get into the thing we call art, like a step-by-step, like, for me personally, like, what I try to do to first inspire like my middle school students is to just show them videos of artists doing their stuff locally, and get them inspired to do that, and get them to realize, like, through various artists working in various materials, that literally anything is possible, and you can make art out of whatever you want. And I think that, like, there's a lot of artists out there that have really great, these days, artists have really great content. So there's like this star quality maybe to some artists. And, that's what I would try to do with my middle schoolers, like, show them videos of these amazing muralists, and show them videos of these awesome woodworkers or installation artists. And then maybe even invite some of those artists into the class. I did a class called Contemporaries, and those artists came in and they spent, an hour or so with the students to create a piece inspired by, in heavy quotes, by their work. And they were just like, Skinner. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Skinner. He's kind of crazy. I don't even know how to describe him, but anyways, they saw a video of his work. They saw a video of him one week, and then when he came to the class, they were like so shy, like, they didn't know how to talk to him. They were starstruck. They thought it was so cool, and like, it really inspired them to want to learn how to draw, want to learn what kind of markers do you use, like, what. And the questions that they were asking the artists, just based off of like kind of a background, viewing their work and their process, was really awesome. So I think in terms of like getting into art, it's just doing it, and being inspired by it, and knowing that anything can be a medium, anything you want can be a medium. And there's a traditional path, I guess, but nobody, at least the people that I like the best, don't take that path. That's it.
Yeah, I think, there's a few questions in the chat about connecting art with young folks, and, what I'm kind of understanding as like words of wisdom. And, I think, the thing about being an artist is that you just be an artist. And I don't mean like with capital A, like artist in the art world. Like, the art world is just one very, very small sort of universe, a bubble that is what art, how art shows up in a particular way, but it's also like a heavily commodified experience, right? And so being an artist is like a way of moving in the world. It's a way of breathing in the world. It's like how I get out of bed in the morning. And it's not determined by any kind of external definitions or forces or factors, right? So it's a sensory experience for me. It's about being really attuned to my environment and reflecting on what's the experience I'm having in my own body as I'm relating to all these other bodies and all these, the earth as a body. And so, I think also, I mean, for me, like I'm a person, I didn't set out to be a teacher or a professor, but it's very much a path that I am committed to. And it's, I think, while I was the beneficiary of like really incredible professors and artists and, like all kinds of people from all different backgrounds that sort of had contributions in terms of, who I am as an artist now and how I show up in the world. So part of my commitment is then to pay that forward in a way. And, there's a lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of things, this whole conversation about paying Black women, we've been in this conversation for a minute now. And I have to say there's like one space where like, I show up and do volunteer work or do things for free. And it's when it's about the students, it's about the young folks, right? Like I want to show up and be there for people. And so thinking about what does that look like? Like I can think back to being a little tiny child and thinking like, oh, I want to be an artist, right? And so being in an environment where that was supported and encouraged and loved and nurtured, and like, my grandma paid for me to go to fancy art school shit, and I still got art school student loans and all of that, but that was my path, right? And so when you see those young folks that are coming up, like how to support that and how to create a sort of container that will hold that impulse and that desire. And just to touch into one of the comments about connecting sort of the political climate and the, understanding like what art can do. This is a time like where artists are showing up big time. Like I've been busier than ever the last, I'm busy all the time, but the last, 5-6 months, like just kind of off the charts. So this is a time where we're really looking to what are our artists doing right now, and what are the vision that artists are putting forward. And so the significance and the relevance of artists and art making and art processes, like I don't question that at all. And it's why, when everything starts to crumble, and it's why when war happens and stuff, first people that they take out, the artists, the poets, the writers, the visionaries, right? Like those are the folks, the musicians, the philosophers. Those are the folks that come for first, So that like shows you how significant our work is, and how what we're up to has this like incredible ripple effect.
I think that's definitely absolutely true. I think one other side and perspective to that is that some people don't have the same proximity to art and the ability to be able to be an artist. Like I'll use myself as an example. I've always wanted to do neon, and I've always wanted to do neon lighting. And the Crucible is in West Oakland, and I went into the Crucible asking about neon classes, and I felt totally unwelcome, and I never went back. And luckily, I was able to meet Meryl, and
Because of me.
I was able to meet Meryl because of Brock and Angela. And then, the proximity that I had to neon then changed. But I think there is a real discrepancy in folks not having a proximity in like classes, like in schools in like Richmond, West Oakland, in the hood, like their arts programs are either dwindling or non-existent in the first place. And they're just, they have more police in schools. If it wasn't for Black Organizing Project, they wouldn't have they just removed themselves from, Oakland Unified School District. They had more police and they had art programs. So I think it's definitely, one different perspective is that some people don't have the proximity to be able to be artists, even if they know or they don't know. Even if they know they want to be, they just may not know. because they don't have the proximity to be able to, you know, have an environment that fosters or a space for them to realize what the potential is there.
I just want to note that if there's any educators, like I know that there's one educator in the mix here, and I say any educators out there as if there's like hundreds of people on this chat. But if I want to be able to, I love talking to youth. I love talking to kids, and like I would offer my time to do that. I mean, that's just kind of what it takes, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it takes...
You have.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what it takes. It takes artists that are passionate about what it is that they do, first and foremost, changing the world, or at least helping, and providing, you know, providing their knowledge for the next generation of people who are going to be observing the world and reacting to it. So I think that, you know, if anybody, like Amanda, for example, here to connect, I know, please email me. Like, I would be happy to spend time on a Zoom and talk to kids about art. And I mean, there's nothing that I would like to do more and how to spend my time. Like, me stressing out about all the emails that I have to do is literally like not what I want to be doing at all. So, so just, yeah, I mean, I think that that's what it takes. Like, you know, like T told me, like T taught me, it starts on your block, right? So that's what it is. That's what it is. Okay, I'm going to pass it off now. I'm going to popcorn.
But how too can institutions do better about serving these needs where they are versus having people come to the institution? Because there's innately so many barriers that it takes just to get to the DeYoung or to MOAD downtown or to OMCA in the East Bay. So, you know, prioritizing providing some of these opportunities directly where they're needed and tailoring that to what's needed. And not speaking as an educator, so Dimitri, I'm sure this is kind of more in your line of work, and I'm sure you're thinking about it and it's been done, but I think, you know, coming from LACMA, hearing the director of LACMA, Mike McGovern, speak about the museums as a library. So there's like a hub, and then there's kind of outposts of places where there's a showing of artworks, or there's an art class, or there's a learning opportunity. And, you know, it's not just about inside our mausoleum walls once people walk in, because a lot of times that experience is not welcoming, and you do not get a good vibe when you meet a VEX person at the frontline staff, or maybe a security guard tells you to remove your backpack, or, you know, it's like there's these rules historically of how to museum, and that needs to just be like completely wiped away in order to be able to figure out what that need is. And then museums need to shift to what the need is versus saying like, oh, I'm going to create this program to get XYZ audience, or to, you know, build up this membership base. It needs to just like be flipped on its head a little bit. And I think that's where it's so important. Angela, you were talking about just the systems that exist. I feel like innately museums are siloed. Working in development, like I have such a hard time just finding opportunities to connect with my colleagues in education and curatorial and interpretation and security and on the front lines. And like, that's the basis of just like shifting the whole model to be able to operate for what its mission is. And that model currently is so broken. And can you like fix a broken model, or do you need to just completely recreate a new one? And I think, you know, that's where we're at with a lot of these conversations. And who's fixing it? Is it the same people that are fixing it? Because that's a problem. You know, it's got to be different voices and new voices as well. So all questions, no answers, but food for thought.
Well, if it ain't broke, don't try and fix it, but it definitely is broke. So it needs to be fixed.
It is very, very broke. But I think, yeah, so we only have a few more minutes here left on, but I just think, you know, I think the last time we talked, we all like really went deep into the entire art world and how the entire art world is problematic. So I think we focused really on on museums, and museums are definitely a symptom of that issue. But you know, when you think about the whole entire art market, and you know, we briefly touched upon the Whitney and how
Collectors.
in collectors, and we kind of talked about how artists, you know, donated their work thinking that they were sponsoring a charity, and next thing they know, an institution has not spoken to them and is mounting their work that they sold at bargain basement prices. And so, you know, that wouldn't happen if the art market was also functioning the right way. So there's this entire system, and so I think artists really do have to be on the vanguard of making that change. And I think we became aware of that issue because the artists got together and they were like, hey, this is not okay. You know, they wrote letters, they did go on social media. And, you know, I think artists are, unfortunately, have always been the ones charged with creating that change. But kind of one of the things also is like artists are usually not that integrated into systems. So there definitely are not very many artists who are sitting in board positions at museums. There's not artists that are at the top of these big art fairs that are making the big decisions. They bring them in to do curatorial work or to be the highlight of a show, but they're not the ones who are brought to the table to make the big decisions. And I think that needs to change.
I think about that in relation to like kind of what you were talking about, Carrie's financial sustainability. And you know, we have at OMCA like 2 goalposts, and this has become like a shorthand for like, we want to have social impact and achieve our social impact goals, but also achieve financial sustainability. And when we hit like our goal right in between those 2 posts, we've achieved success. And I think my experience has been, and not just at that place, but lots of other places, has been that you can't do those 2 things at the same time. Like your football is going to go on one end or the other, and that those 2 things are not really compatible. And in an environment in which like public funding sources, those sources that institutions, again, for better or worse, could rely upon as a you know, a consistent income stream, as those keep drying up, museums and other cultural institutions are scrambling to like sell in a new way, in ways that we're not used to, and to sell most often to what people who are working at those institutions assume is like a normative audience, which would be wealthy white folks, primarily, like our traditional audiences. So to say that we're both trying to like push the envelope as institutions and invite new kinds of people, but in order to do that, we still have to sell ourselves to this like middle of the road group that that we assume is not interested in funding work that isn't like, that doesn't center them as an audience, is a weird tension that I feel like all the conferences I've gone to, all the professional conversations I've had, no one is really, you know, funding is not a sexy topic to talk about, but I do think it's really, considering the financial, like, what was it, that New York Times article that said 1/3 of all cultural institutions are not going to survive the pandemic? You know, it's something to really think about. Like, if we're going to, it's a sort of Ouroboros thing. Like, we want to exist, but we also want to do good work, but we'll doing good work, like, put at risk our existence, and then it's a weird sort of like feedback loop.
Arundina, quick thought. There's a really great podcast called Philanthropy and Social Movements that are students that are focusing on a lot of these issues that I found really useful. And I think an interesting comment that came up about your thought was that, you know, museums have existed to serve a specific white, well-off, with money demographic. And so that's a majority of our board base and membership base and donor base. And so now we're stuck in the situation of like servicing their needs, because we need their money to do what we do, and support their ideas and initiatives, versus creating programs that we should be creating to service all communities of San Francisco and the Bay Area, and losing some of those members because they don't agree with what we're doing, or they think it's political, or they think that it, you know, is problematic. And so the shift needs to be finding supporters who feel passionate about the work that we are doing and are committed to doing. And we don't need to keep a value on top of their monetary gifts. It needs to be a value for, you know, their insight and their expertise and their artistic practice. And Dimitri, that goes to like you talking a little bit about having artists on boards and having artists on staff and
Equity.
Yeah, equity. It's transformation that has to take place at all levels. It can't just take place at like the social media team's level. Like it really has to be ingrained in an entire institution for it to be effective. So
Come through, Carrie. It's not on the social
I think,
media.
yeah, I just want to also kind of remind folks of this idea about connoisseurship, which is one of the strategies that museums and collections and archivists sort of build, kind of use to justify the theft of artworks, whether it be historical or contemporary. And so this notion, I mean, one of my, I think a really significant book that I read years ago by Sally Price is called Primitive Art in Civilized Places. And it literally kind of outlines the demographics of how and who is participating in the various roles and responsibilities of all kinds of art relationships, from the anonymous artist, right? We see that label attached to so much of African art, right? It's like the unknown maker, right? But that also sort of feeds into this role then of the Western European sort of cultural gatekeeper who's the connoisseur, who knows everything and who has a kind of expertise and can identify the provenance of a particular object, right? And that's like power knowledge system, right? Like who knows what and how they then control that cycle of I know something, I withhold that knowledge, and it repeats itself, right? It's like a self-fulfilling kind of prophecy. So we have to undermine those relationships and think about, how artists show up as artists, like regardless of whatever the fuck is going on in the art world or whatever the fuck is going on in the museum, like look what's happening in downtown Oakland on the streets right now. Like that's where the art is happening right now. The back of West Oakland, like there's, unsanctioned art that is popping off all over. And, I know there's like great, really important groups that are generating a lot of the funds. Like there's hella money that's popping up right now, right? Like all of a sudden people want to support artists. It's like, well, where were you last year?
Right. Where was the social political responsibility?
So, like there are people who are trying, who are supporting muralists and, taking up space in the street and painting over, plywood boarded up buildings and all that stuff. But like we need to really, as artists, I think, and I say that really broadly, however you define yourself as a maker of things or even maybe an unmaker of things, like we gotta like be, really build up and support each other in our confidence and our commitment to what we're up to, right? So when, you have a bad day and you forget the purpose of your life and your work, like, you've got this reflection around you of like, I see you, Arandia, I see you, Dimitri, I see you, Meryl, right? I see you, T, Carrie, Jen, like, that we all see each other in the work that we're trying to do. And so that all of the messaging, that's like out there that isn't, constructive or supportive, it's like, if you know who you are, then that shit just rolls off the back, right? So we gotta, I think,
on our block.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes,
I mean, throughout
exactly.
history, art has been used as a successful tool to, communicate. And the institutions need to incorporate that. I think that that's the bottom line. We need to engage in social ideas and actions, especially in this current movement, by putting them into practice.
Remember what I mentioned in our call before, our like prep call, that one of the things, I mean, like what I remember most is artists getting up on plywood all around downtown Oakland. I'm not going to remember what an institution did. That's what I remember, and that's what I feel is kind of a little bit more important. So to answer Amanda's question, how do we bring the small community to the larger community, is just by example. And like T says, it starts on your block, like just taking the
door to door, talking to your neighbors. What
Exactly.
you do locally, hopefully you hope that will spread globally.
Start at home.
You start at home.
I know it sounds so idealistic, and yeah. I actually have a question for Carrie really quick before we end, and I have it circled in my notes. What's up with the DeYoung residency program?
Say it again, Meryl. You cut out.
Young used to have a residency program for artists and the community, and that was Nick.
That was-
So I can pass the buck a
I
little
think
bit.
the last go for it.
Yeah, I can pass the buck a little bit because I actually wasn't here, unfortunately, when the residency program started, but I have heard a lot of internal frustration and call for this program to be started again, specifically amongst the education team, amongst the curatorial team. I believe it was an initiative that was let go by the previous director, who is now the director of the Met. And so there is a lot of internal demand to start that program back up because of all of just the positive feedback and engagement that it provided. So the space that was the artist in residency program is now an education space for kids and families, the DeYoungster Studio. So the situation we're in is honestly just finding space and dedicating that space to the local arts community, to a strategic program that isn't just a one-off. So it's an active discussion. I'll give you emails of who to contact directly, who oversees it, so that you can keep that conversation going. But it's definitely something.
You don't need to write a strongly worded letter.
Yes, it is the education team. So I'll connect you directly, but there's a lot of internal discussion about the residency program and the Friday nights that just like instantly went away all of a sudden.
Wide awake.
When you say that they're looking for space, does that mean that there literally isn't space for it, or they're looking for space that they can sacrifice for that?
The latter, looking for space, internal galleries that they can sacrifice, that, you know, that goes back to the systems of power and curators having specific space for specific galleries that represent different cultures and artworks. And so letting go of some of the permanent collection spaces or the special exhibition spaces to be used for local community spaces. Which there's a few that we have no lack of space. It's a problem that can be solved, but just keeping it a priority internally is really one of the hardest struggles of that. And that goes back to people using their voices, artists, community members, internal staff members, keeping things a priority. Otherwise, it'll just fall on the list of other things that are kind of bubbling up. So
I think that all institutions need to implement, if they don't already have, an artist residency program or some sort of program that invites in members of the community, even artists without a capital A, to showcase their process, their work, and to also teach, right? And so that not only brings in the community, brings in the youth, and brings in the educational component, but it provides that artist with education experience, which is really good.
Totally.
For their CV. It's something that artists should all be doing.
And not just artists in residency. Moab has a great chef in residence program. Like, there's so many other avenues of creative residency programs that aren't just traditional art, which are also creative exploration. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
I'm going to pop in here, guys, because we're a little bit over time. I feel like this could go on forever with so much to cover, and we're sort of just scratching the surface. I'm really glad to be able to hold space for conversation like this, and plan to have many more as we figure out how to, create long-term change. Also, this is being recorded, so I will post that. I will also send a follow-up email so everyone can connect with each other and the panelists beyond just this event. And of course, I just want to send an enormous thank you to you guys for being here and taking time out of your incredibly busy schedules to have this important conversation, and to everyone here that joined today, and to Sophie James for providing us with booze, and thank you.
Meryl, you're
Thanks, Sophie. Thank you, Sophie.
How many of you guys have already finished your bottle?
I'm halfway.
Oh, wow.
I want to say one thing.
Half of it.
I need a report.
Ah.
I'm halfway through.
We definitely got one more swig.
Thank you so much. I love talking with you guys. I feel like our conversation is.
Hold on, Meryl.
What?
Oh, sorry. I just want to remind folks, if you invited your ancestors or your dead people to join us this evening, please take them with you. Don't leave them out here in Zoom land. You don't
That's
have
real.
to go home, but you can't stay here kind of thing. So take them home to your altar, to your space, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Jen, thank
you,
you
Jen.
for providing
Yes.
this
This
platform.
was amazing.
Dimitri,
Awesome.
this was great.
Oh,
Edendina, it was nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Carrie,
Thanks.
All
Yeah,
right.
I'm looking forward to connecting with everyone.
Yeah, same.
town business.
Yeah.
Thank you. We might make this a series.
Great.
No.
As long as there's some wine and some good company.
And some Trader Joe's cheese.
Yeah, that's right. That
pretty
cheese.
good, I gotta say.
We finished it.
I ate it all.
Trader Joe's was good. Bye, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Good night,
Thanks so
everyone.
much.
Good
Good night.
Who else we got?